It's Nick, welcome back to my channel. Okay, in this video today, we are going to be talking about mixing metal mistakes. So some of you have asked, can you mix different types of metals, different finishes into the same space and make it look really cohesive and beautiful? And the answer is yes, but there are some mistakes that you want to avoid, and that is what I'm touching on in this video. So frequently on this channel, I have said that when you want to create a really cohesive space, one of the things you can do is match sort of different finishes or metal finishes around your space to create something really cohesive. So that repetition around the room can really make a difference to make it look really put together and cohesive. But there is an opportunity to add in different metals together in the same space, but you want to do it in a really beautiful, cohesive way without making these mistakes. So let's get to them. Okay, mistake number one is mixing more than, I'm gonna say, 2 metals in the same space. So in a pinch, maybe you can get away with 3. That is a little bit tricky. Anything more than that, and it starts to look really cluttered and really messy. I would advise sticking to 1 metal finish, like I talked about, to make it really beautiful and cohesive. But if you want to introduce a second metal, that's fine. But I just think going more than 2 is a mistake. 3 is a stretch, 4 is definitely a mistake. I would advise sticking to 2. It's really going to make a space feel really balanced, and I think really cohesive, and it just gives you an opportunity to sort of blend them in a really beautiful way. More than that, and it starts to look really cluttered and busy, and in my opinion, that is a mistake. Okay, mistake number 2 is mixing 2 different finishes together that are too similar. So I think it's really important to have contrast in your metals, because I think if you are trying to blend 2 finishes that are really similar, it looks like you tried and failed, and I think you really need that contrast to really pull it together. So what are examples of finishes I think that are too similar? So something like matte black and oil rubbed bronze. They are quite similar in nature. They look quite similar, but they are that little bit different. So they don't have the contrast that you're going to need to really pull off this look. Other examples would be something like chrome and brushed nickel. Both can be really beautiful, but you see they are similar enough that I think they're a mistake putting them together in the same space. It looks like you tried and it just didn't work out. Gold and brass. Now, ooh, you guys, this one is tricky because there are so many different types of finishes that are so similar here, but they're just not quite the same. So for example, satin brass or satin gold can look similar, but they're just close enough that I don't think they really work because it's just not enough of a contrast to really pull it off. So you want something that has a lot of contrast. Something like satin brass, for example, and matte black would work really well together. They're both very, very different and thus provide the contrast that you need to work them together beautifully. Something like matte black and say copper would work really beautifully well together, right? You can absolutely pull those off. You can pull off chrome and copper, for example. These sort of different contrasting finishes, I think will really help create something that looks intentional and it looks like you didn't try to match something and it flopped. Okay, tip number 3 is going to be putting similar toned metals together, really close together in the same space. So here's what I mean by that. Sometimes, especially like I just said, with those like satin gold, gold brassy sort of finishes, when they are put really close together, they really emphasize how different they are. So different manufacturers have different versions of what brushed gold means versus something like satin brass, for example. From one manufacturer to the next, they might actually look really, really similar, even though they might be called something a little bit different, or they're called the same thing, but they just don't match perfectly. So I would advise that if you are using the same finish, but it maybe doesn't match perfectly, spread them out throughout the space. Even a really judgmental person like me that is able to like spot these things and go like, ooh, those don't match, won't be able to see the like subtle differences in the same tone when they're spread out throughout the room. So for example, I would say it's a mistake to put, say, a satin gold faucet right underneath another satin gold mirror, but they're not quite the same. You know what I mean? Because that's really gonna emphasize those differences. And again, it's gonna look like you tried and failed. However, if you maybe have a satin gold mirror, but then maybe you do have a satin gold, but not quite perfectly matched tub filler, and it's in a different area of the bathroom, no one is going to be able to necessarily spot those similarities and be able to see that the two of them don't quite work together. So if you are choosing similar finishes, but they're not quite perfectly matched, just try to spread them out throughout the space, because if you put them really close together, people are going to be able to pick up on those differences and they won't really look cohesive and really like they belong together. And again, some finishes I think are harder than others. I find gold ones to be particularly different. Matte black, for example, is usually fairly consistent and thus you won't really run into this problem as much. Same with chrome. From one manufacturer to the next, it's pretty much going to look the same. So it's usually a lot easier to get away with that. But some of these gold or copper or even rose gold, oh my gosh, one person's champagne gold is another person's one's rose gold, and like honestly, they kind of look like they're similar, but they're like really, really different. It really just depends on the manufacturer. So some colors, some finishes, this is easier than others. Okay, my next mixed metal mistake is going to be mixing different finishes for things that have the same function. So for example, I would say if you have like cabinet pulls in your kitchen, right? Like I think it's a mistake for you to maybe use matte black for some of your cabinet pulls, but then use something like satin brass for a different set of cabinet pulls in the same room, because those all have the same function. Same goes with things like faucets. If you have in your bathroom, you have the faucet on the vanity in satin brass, but then all of a sudden you decide to do matte black or maybe chrome for your tub filler, that's a mistake. You really should be consistent with the function in the same room so that it looks really intentional. So again, faucets should be the same in the same room. Cabinet pulls, drawer pulls, all those should be consistent in the same space. Things like mirrors, don't put a chrome mirror in one area of the room and then do something like a matte black mirror in the same space. I would not mix the function and mixing the metals. Those should all be consistent. Now, if you want to do cabinet pulls in matte black, but then you want to do your faucet and your tub filler or whatever in satin gold, that's fine. That's a great way for you to mix metals because you're still using the same metal across the different function in the same space. So it looks really consistent, it looks really organized, and it's not gonna look off the way that it would if you have some pulls in one color and some pulls in a different one. Okay, my next mixed metal mistake is going to be don't have one single lonely finish in a space. Make sure it has a friend, right? So I would avoid in the same room having everything in matte black, but then just having like one rose gold item in the center of the room or something like that. Like say like the kitchen faucet or the tub filler or something like that. I would give it a friend because then by matching things up and giving it a pair, it provides kind of a little bit more balance amongst the two different finishes that you're doing in the space. So if you've got everything in one finish and then you just have one, it sort of looks like you made a mistake and you just kind of threw in a token finish. It's not really like an accent finish that you just kind of want to throw in there. In order for it to look really balanced, I would suggest that you use those two different finishes a couple of times in the space. It's fine to have a primary finish and then maybe have an accent or like a secondary finish, but just make sure that he has a friend. Don't just maybe give him the one lonely faucet in the middle of the room. You know, so let's say you have that lighting fixture in the center of the room, maybe give him a little bit of a friend and add on maybe the sconces. So maybe you've got kind of the ambient light in the center of the room, but maybe you've got the sconces that match in the same metal finish. That would work really beautifully together, right? Don't just have that one metal finish. Make sure that he has a little bit of a friend so that it kind of draws the eyes around the room and makes it look really balanced between the two finishes. Okay, my next mixing metal mistake is going to be not considering just using one. So this is like maybe kind of a weird one, but I'm just gonna throw it in there because I do think sometimes people want to mix metals because they think like, yes, that's gonna make a space look really interesting and beautiful. And it does, but there's a lot of ways that you can make your space look really interesting and beautiful without necessarily introducing two different metals. If you want to use one metal, I think that's beautiful. I think you can absolutely get away with using one metal consistently throughout the whole space. I think it looks beautiful. I think it looks really contemporary. When you look at all these contemporary, gorgeous spaces that are around right now, it's very common for you to just see matte black everywhere, that they have just really used matte black, dialed in that one finish, and used it consistently throughout the whole space. I think it's a mistake to introduce mixed metals just because you feel like you have to. I think a lot of people feel like they need to introduce a second metal and that it's too boring to use one. Absolutely not. I think it looks really cohesive and really gorgeous. And so consider that a really great option so that you don't have to necessarily mix metals if you don't want to. Okay, my next mixed metal mistake is going to be, it's not really about well, it's sort of mixing metals, but anyway, I'm just gonna throw it in because yeah, it's my video, I can do what I want. And that is to not consider like chrome finishes on really heavily used handles. So again, this is weirdly specific, but I'm just gonna throw it in there because I think it's a mistake worth mentioning while you're talking about metals in your own space. When you're talking about things like cabinet hardware or door hardware, like door handles and stuff, and faucets even, like really consider that chrome leaves a lot of fingerprints. So those heavily used handles and stuff, they can really be fingerprint magnets if you're looking at things like chrome or especially just really shiny surfaces. But chrome is particularly tricky. You might want to consider something like brushed nickel or something like that, that maybe is going to leave a lot less fingerprints. I'm just saying, you've been warned. If fingerprints drive you nuts, consider go for something like with a matte finish or just a different finish apart from chrome in those heavily used sort of handles and cabinet pulls and all those different things. Because if that drives you nuts, you've been warned. It absolutely will drive you crazy because those things are fingerprint magnets. Okay, my next mixing metal mistake is going to be too closely following the trends in metals. I get this all the time. I feel like people are really concerned that a lot of the metals that are really popular right now are super trendy and they're going to be out. Things like brass right now has definitely been having a moment for a while, and people are really concerned that it's going to be going away. I love trends. You all know I love trends. I talk about them on this channel all the time because I like trends because they give you a lot of really great new ideas, right? You see a lot of things coming. You see little kind of ways that people combine things together in really interesting ways, and it's inspiring, and you can sort of learn and maybe build that into your own space, that you can find your own personal style and, you know, love the home where you're in, right? And I think that's really important, and I love that about trends. I think it's great to have those new ideas. Metals don't really kind of change all that much, and yes, I know there's always new metals that are coming out, new things, there's just ebb and flow, but I don't really necessarily see that there's a ton of like new ideas coming out in the world of metals. I just think people get caught up with this metal is really out, this metal is really in, and I'm kind of a little bit tired of it, to be honest, when it comes to this particular subject. A lot of people are just really concerned that, you know, rose gold, for example, was really huge like 4 or 5 years ago, and they're really concerned that matte black and brass are having a moment now, and brushed gold, but maybe they'll be out in a few years, and people are kind of like, ugh, do I replace all my brushed nickel and chrome? Because, you know, brushed nickel and ORB are maybe a little bit more out of style now, and people are just really kind of thinking about this stuff way too much, you guys. I think work with your design style, work with the color scheme that you really enjoy. I love brass fixtures because I just really love them. I just think they're really gorgeous and warm, and it just really kind of fits my style. So I love brass, I love brushed gold. Those tend to be my first choice, and I don't care if they're going to be out in like 3, 4, 5 years. Stop thinking too much about necessarily what's out all the time. Take trends for what they are, which is great new ideas that you can learn from and bring into your own home, but ultimately it is about your own home. So stop thinking about all the metal trends. They're always out there. You know, who cares? Just, you know, run with it and pick what you love. Okay, my next mixing metal mistake is really just a metal mistake in general rather than necessarily mixing, but since we're on the subject, here goes. We are going to be talking about spray painting finishes that maybe you have sitting around. So as I said, matte black is very popular right now. People love matte black. I think it's a beautiful finish. It's been around for a little while. People seem to really enjoy it. It's very popular. I love it. One thing to consider is rather than throwing out all those ones that maybe you're really sick of, and maybe you're trying to make your space feel a little bit more cohesive and you're trying to tie it all together, and when looking at your space and maybe sort of refreshing it a little bit, I know a lot of you are going to be considering matte black for your space because I know it is so popular. One thing to consider is if you're trying to sort of tighten up those finishes to maybe just kind of bring it back to just those main two, consider spray painting them. This is something a lot of people don't realize, but matte black is actually really easy to achieve for your own space. You can just spray paint it and you can give you a really close replication of what a matte black fixture is going to look like. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to say it's the same thing, right? Obviously, having something powder coated matte black or from the manufacturer is going to be a higher quality than what you're going to do by just kind of spray painting something yourself. But honestly, if it comes down to looking at some of those old tired finishes in your space, especially things like those cabinet pulls and things like that, and you're just like, you know, do I just chuck them out and get new ones? Just consider giving them a little bit more life by giving them a little fresh coat of spray paint, and you'll be surprised how you're able to take some of those little tiny details, those little sort of finishes that you're trying to kind of bring in to create something a little bit more cohesive. So you're maybe bringing that back to 1 or 2 finishes. And if one of those finishes is black, consider spray painting it and you're good to go, and it'll make your whole space feel a little bit more cohesive and balanced with those 1 or 2 finishes. It's a really easy, low-cost option to give you a great look. Okay, so that's it for me for today, guys. I'm gonna link here to my video on decorating with black because, as I mentioned, matte black fixtures are very popular right now, and we all love matte black as a metal, and you might want to consider it for your own homes. I'm gonna link to that video here, and you can take a look on how to decorate with black, and I will see you all in the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye.